morning, Dog Nation. I'm Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily show, podcast, whatever you want to call it, for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Fun show for us coming up today. Randy McMichael, our buddy, the former Georgia tight end, a guy that knows about making that transition from college to the NFL. He's going to be with us in today's show. He's always very outspoken and a lot of fun, and today will be no exception on that. I also want to start the show with some interesting thoughts on DeAndre Swift, who I think maybe is more a part of the Heisman Trophy conversation this season than some might realize or some might want to give credit for. So we'll do a little bit of that. Pretty interesting debate amongst Georgia fans yesterday involving two of Georgia's top recruits. We'll hit on that. And, oh, yeah, by the way, these really cool Road to Atlanta T-shirts, we're going to talk about giving those away today as well. And we'll see if we can keep this from becoming too convoluted. But nonetheless, it's all on the way next as DawgNation Daily begins right now.
Presented by DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
There was a tweet that got some attention around the world of college football this week, and I thought it might be appropriate for us to speak about for a minute or two, but not necessarily in the context that you might think we'd mention it. And I'm always kind of hesitant to bring some of this kind of stuff up because every time the name Justin Fields gets mentioned, there's this question among many Georgia fans of, oh, why are you talking about Justin Fields? As I've said before, we're not going to find a reason every day to speak about Fields, the one-time Georgia quarterback, but also given the fact that Georgia's going to be a top-5 team, Fields' new team, Ohio State's going to be a top-5 team, it would also be unreasonable to presume that you can pretend that Justin Fields doesn't exist. There's no reason for us to try to, pretend that Fields is not a real player and potentially a player that Georgia could run into in the college football playoff and potentially a player that could be compared alongside some of the Georgia players this season. We're not going to pretend that Fields doesn't exist. So with that in mind, the tweet that got some attention this week came from the ESPN college football account looking at the Westgate, which is the Las Vegas Superbook. It's probably, I would say, among the leading sports books out in Las Vegas, and they have, I don't know if it's a first release for Westgate or if it's a re-release of Heisman odds, I'm not sure. Obviously, when they release their odds, they're going to have a lot of candidates for the Heisman Trophy, but the ESPN college football page only highlighted 4 of these in terms of the 2019 Heisman. And at the top of the list, you've got Tua Tagovailoa at about 2.5 to 1 to win this year's award. At one point in time, it seemed like he was the odds-on favorite to win this past year's award before being unseated by Kyler Murray. Just below that, you've got Clemson's Trevor Lawrence at 3 to 1. And then somewhat surprisingly, you've got a couple other names. Oklahoma quarterback Jalen Hurts, the Alabama transfer, he is at 6 to 1. And Justin Fields, the Ohio State quarterback, is also at 6 to 1. Now, I don't know that the presence of Fields here in those unbelievable, incredible odds is so much a statement about Fields as it is a statement about the Ohio State offense and Ryan Day, and also just the fact that out in Las Vegas, a lot of tourists are Ohio State fans, and they're going to want to bet on their own quarterback. There is no way the real odds on Fields winning the Heisman Trophy are 6 to 1, but that's what they are at the Las Vegas Superbook. Now, you might think that in this conversation, mentioning all these quarterbacks, Tagovailoa and Lawrence and Fields and Jalen Hurts, that it becomes a comparison between Georgia quarterback Jake Fromm. For now, though, that's not really what I want to do. I have said before, I think I even said this on Before the Hedges yesterday, the recruiting show we do on Wednesday afternoons presented by Kroger with Jeff Santel, that I do believe that Jake Fromm can win this year's Heisman. I think he's going to throw it enough this year to put himself in contention for the award, and the Heisman's kind of always one of those best player on the best team scenarios, and that could be Fromm this season. But as many of you are aware, Jake Fromm is not the only Heisman candidate on the Georgia roster this season. And for some reason, looking at those 4 quarterbacks makes me think a little bit about Georgia running back DeAndre Swift. Now, what I'm about to say, I guess, should come with a caveat and a warning of maybe this is just Georgia guy making a Georgia opinion. Red and black colored glasses, whatever you want to call it, the host of DawgNation Daily, wearing red and black clothes virtually every single day. Maybe this is just coming from a place of deep within the bubble of DawgNation. But I'm going to say it nonetheless. I'm going to stand behind it, I think, for the entire season. Given the makeup of the Georgia roster, if you gave me a choice, for some reason there's been this, kind of idea of college football trades out there in the woodworks as of late. Connor Riley's written about this at DawgNation.com. ESPN had their turn with this as well. Trades are obviously a pro sport phenomenon, but let's just say hypothetically they existed in the world of college sports. Let me make it very clear right now. I'm not trading DeAndre Swift for any of the guys on that ESPN list of most likely Heisman favorites. No disrespect to Justin Fields. I'm not trading DeAndre Swift for him. No disrespect to Jalen Hurts. He's a backup quarterback. I'm not trading my starting running back for Jalen Hurts. The same thing for Trevor Lawrence, as good as he is. Georgia's already got a quarterback. Tua Tagovailoa, as good as he is, Georgia's already got a quarterback, and he's played just fine. With all of that kind of understood, the running back that Georgia has that'll also show up as a bit longer odds, but still among the Heisman favorites, DeAndre Swift, I'm not trading him for any of those quarterbacks that were just mentioned. And if I feel that way about Swift, then maybe the chances are DeAndre Swift is a little bit more of a Heisman candidate than the ESPN Twitter feed would have you believe, or the Las Vegas Superbook, the Westgate Hotel and Casino would have you believe. Maybe DeAndre Swift is indeed supposed to be a part of this conversation this year. Now, our buddy Mike Griffith from DawgNation.com actually at one point, I guess leading up to the Sugar Bowl, kind of caught up with DeAndre Swift on this subject. Next year, a bigger role, even more stardom, just given the success that he had in his sophomore season of 2018. It's not, unrealistic to think that DeAndre Swift could be mentioned for the Heisman a lot. Mike asked DeAndre, hey, is that something you'd like to do? And, well, DeAndre Swift gave you the answer that you'd assume. Yeah, winning the Heisman's kind of a cool thing. Here's how DeAndre Swift said it.
I mean, always growing up, seeing people like Mark Ingram, one of the backs I watched when I was young. But next season, I would like to be on the Heisman list, most definitely. Who wouldn't be? You know what I'm saying? So just this offseason, I'm going to work. I'm going to work. So this team, I think next year we can do whatever we want to do if we put our minds to it.
Yeah, listen, I love that line at the end. This team can do anything we want to do if we put our minds to it. So I'm not going to lie to you, Swift says. Growing up in Philadelphia, the idea of hoisting that Heisman trophy and being just a few miles from my hometown of Philadelphia in New York City to the Downtown Athletic Club to enjoy that award, that'd be kind of a cool thing, and obviously we'd all feel the same way. If you get a chance to win the Heisman, you obviously want to do it, but Swift obviously sees the team tie-in on this, that you're not going to win the Heisman on a 7-5 team. But if Georgia's the kind of team that dominates in 2019 the way that we think it could, then having a individual accolade, an individual award contender for that, those are just kind of some of the things that go along with that. And DeAndre Swift says, I wouldn't mind being a part of that discussion. However, there are those out there who think that the days of guys like DeAndre Swift being able to win the Heisman Trophy, they are just over and gone. And this is now solely a quarterback's award. An example of that comes from Andy Staples from Sports Illustrated. Now, what Staples writes isn't specifically critical of DeAndre Swift. It's just generally observant of the fact that quarterbacks seem to dominate this award now. Here's what Staples recently said at Sports Illustrated. He says, college offenses have evolved to the point where quarterbacks can so dominate a game statistically that it makes it difficult for running backs. I mean, how could a back stand a chance against Kyler Murray, who averaged 11.6 yards every time he threw the ball last season and 7.2 yards every time he ran the ball, even with sacks included? He had the ball in his hands every single play. Derrick Henry was the last non-quarterback to win the Heisman. That was in 2015. But had the award been given out after the college football playoff instead of before, I imagine many voters would have joined me in placing Clemson quarterback Deshaun Watson first. That's Andy Staples from Sports Illustrated. Now, the larger point that Staples is trying to make is that he thinks that a lot of non-quarterbacks should be considered for the award, defensive players included. Now, I agree with Staples on that. I'm a big believer that you ought to be able to open this award up to all positions, and actually the Heisman conversation each season would be made more interesting if defensive players and wide receivers and running backs were more in consideration for the award. But for the purposes of this particular conversation, I want to kind of push that aside for the moment, and we'll make that case, I guess, on some other show. As far as 2019, is it still possible for a running back to win this award? And in particular, could it be possible for DeAndre Swift to win the award? I've already given you my opinion of how important I think that Swift is, even in comparison to the top quarterbacks in college football. And I guess here's the thing that I would hope, that Georgia kind of stands out in college football in 2019 as a bit unique in the fact that while you've got Kyler Murray and these Big 12-style offenses, even Trevor Lawrence and Clemson is a little bit of a wide-open, let's play really fast and throw the football a lot. Georgia, for the most part, goes about its business in a slightly different way. And no one can deny college football playoff in 2017, back-to-back winners of the SEC East 2018, destroying most of the competition that it's faced over the last couple of years. No one can deny that Georgia's formula is working. Well, in 2019, that formula works to the tune of getting back to the college football playoff once again, using big offensive linemen, using really good running backs, then maybe Georgia, maybe more so than other programs in college football, ought to have a running back worthy of consideration. I mean, after all, 2015 wasn't quite that long ago. Derrick Henry was able to do that for Alabama then, and maybe, just maybe, in 2019, DeAndre Swift might be able to sort of carry the mail for running backs once again, and Georgia fans in particular, to see another UGA guy back in New York as a Heisman finalist. My name is Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Hello to you, and thanks for being with us. Live on video today, 10 a.m., DawgNation YouTube, Facebook page, the DawgNation Twitter feed. We're glad to have you there. Also fun to be with our friends in Athens on the radio, on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref. And we are available as a podcast pretty much wherever podcasts can be found. The world-famous Apple Podcasts player, the Google Podcast player, I guess, for the Android devices, the world-famous DawgNation.com. We're just glad to have you as a part of our program today. As I mentioned to our video audience before, we've got a fun guest coming up in just a minute. The great former Georgia tight end Randy McMichael, who had a long NFL career, and it's a good time to have Randy on the show, which we're going to have in just a couple of minutes. Randy knows about making that transition from college to the NFL. He had a terrific NFL career for a couple of different teams, and he's going to talk about a lot of the Georgia players trying to travel down that same path as the NFL Combine gets going in earnest today. So that'll be fun with Randy McMichael coming up in just a couple of minutes. Before that, though, let's go around the doghouse here today, presented by Online Trading Academy. And I want to go back to yesterday's edition of Before the Hedges for a moment, because we had a really fun conversation. This is a great idea for Jeff. As we kind of put the full lid and the final finishing touches on Georgia's 2019 class, we had our Eddies yesterday, which were the award. Now, by the way, speaking of Eddie, we don't actually have him on the set right now. Maybe he's a little bit, still a little tired and kind of exhausted from his big feature debut yesterday on the Eddies on Before the Hedges. But the Eddies, so to speak, were the awards honoring the top recruits and the top moments from Georgia's 2019 class. I don't know if we have the opportunity to recap this at all. Yeah, so here's what we had. We had Dominic Blaylock as best score, and that's obviously a play on the Oscars theme for the best score. But in the case of Dominic Blaylock, we meant top highlight, top touchdown. Brett Scyther was our top 3-star recruit. Tyreek Stevenson was our top 4-star recruit. Clay Webb got honored as most interesting. He took home the Eddie for that. Nakobe Dean for best moment. I explained yesterday that I love the fact that Dean put on his old school shirt, the UGA shirt, when he made his commitment. I love the new school guys who have the old school flair, so I appreciate Nakobe Dean on that. Dan Lanning got a Recruiter of the Year, and then we had a little bit of a debate. It was kind of fun to watch Georgia fans kind of square off on this. And before I mention this, first of all, if you're watching on video, how about the really cool bronzed version of Eddie on the screen as the official kind of award trophy that was given out? I love that. Great job by Connor Riley on that, and a lot of fun. And as I was saying before, what else was also fun is to listen to the debate from Georgia fans when we got down to our final two Eddies for 2019 signees. It was Recruit of the Year, and it was an Eddie that we called Most Likely to Succeed. Now, ultimately, Nolan Smith took home our Recruit of the Year, and it's easy to understand why that was the case. But in terms of Most Likely to Succeed, this is about a projection of who may be drafted the highest one day in the NFL and who may go on to have the best NFL career. And this is one of those that internally, me, Jeff, our entire staff, we debated a good bit. And when we presented this to our audience yesterday on the video show for Before the Hedges, there was also a good bit of debate as well. Ultimately, the opinion that I had ended up carrying the day. That if you're going to give me a chance to sort of select most likely to succeed among Georgia's 2019 signees right now, my guy on this is Trayvon Walker, more so than Nolan Smith, and maybe even more so than Nakobe Dean and George Pickens, a whole host of guys who all have the potential for great futures. But there's something about Trayvon Walker right now that I find pretty special. Some Georgia fans agreed with them. Others would have selected a different name. Jeff Sintel, our recruiting insider, weighed in particular on the subject of comparing Trayvon Walker to another name that could have been very well a recipient of this award, another 5-star Georgia signee, Nolan Smith. Here is a very interesting take from Jeff on how these two guys compare right now. Take a listen to this.
I just think he's the best pound-for-pound athlete in the class because what he can do at that weight at 290. Of course, Nolan Smith can walk on water and do a great many things. It's all great. Nolan is he won the Spark Rating Championship this year at the Nike Opening. He is a extremely twitchy dude. But then Nolan's only about 230, and look what Trayvon Walker can do at 290. Not only that, he's got a little bit of Jim Thorpe to him as well, or maybe the decathlon to him as well, because look what he does. He's also a state finalist. He throws the shot at a state finalist level in the Georgia High School Athletic Association. So he's already in the 1 percentile, the number 1 percentile of all high school athletes in football, basketball, and track. He's won multiple state championships. The other thing with Trayvon is you're looking at a big man there who's probably for his high school career averaged somewhere around 11 points, 9 boards, 3 assists, and 2 blocks per game. And that's your defensive tackle. And that's why I think NFL pro scouts will look at that, the total package of athleticism, especially after 3 years in Sinclair's kind of kitchen, getting cooked up and getting his right with his body and his weight redistributed and his explosion. I think Trayvon Walker has a very bright future.
Now, the good thing for Georgia fans is the debate about which is the more exciting prospect in the future, Walker or Smith. Probably doesn't matter all that much because Georgia's lucky enough to have them both. But there is something right now about Trayvon Walker as he continues to make a name for himself athletically, even away from the football field, that I think does make him a really, really special player to think about what his future might be at the University of Georgia. Good stuff from Jeff Sentell on yesterday's edition of Before the Hedges. And it's a great way to kind of wrap up around the doghouse here today, presented by Online Trading Academy. And by now, you know what Online Trading Academy does. They provide professional instruction on how you can make money in the markets. Students learn a step-by-step process, trading and investing, that covers a spectrum of trading styles and asset classes, both in the classroom and online. So make the best possible decision you could make by making the decision to invest in yourself today. Simply check out tradingacademy.com/Atlanta. The website, once again, is tradingacademy.com/Atlanta, and you'll be glad you did. All right, later on today on DawgNation Daily, I'm going to talk more about how you can win one of our really cool DawgNation Daily Road to Atlanta t-shirts. But for now, with more on the NFL Combine and everything happening around UGA, let's talk to a great former Georgia player and a terrific NFL name as well. It's our buddy, the former tight end, Randy McMichael.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Randy McMichael getting honored as a DawgNation insider. That's quite an accolade for Randy there on that. It's been a while since we've had Randy on the program, and it's good to have you back with us, Randy. Thanks for spending some time with us. I hope you're doing well.
Hey, no problem, BA, man. I'm doing good, man. Just sitting here about to get a little workout in. How about yourself?
Yeah, doing well. Not getting a workout in, although I think most of our audience would suggest that I probably need one. But that's why you look the way that you look, and I guess I look the way that I look. But nonetheless, we will soldier on nonetheless. And speaking of workouts, you know, this week is one of those times where a lot of guys are about to do and go through a thing that you yourself went through in your NFL career, that combine where you had to go out and make a name for yourself. How nervous were you? How nervous do you expect these UGA guys to be this week? And, you know, what is it like being in Indianapolis where all this goes on?
Well, for me, I wasn't really that nervous, man. I mean, because I looked at it as a situation where I just go prove yourself. You know, I didn't have the best combine that I wanted, but I had no regrets about it. But it is a nerve-wracking experience because, I mean, it's cliche. It is the biggest job interview that most of these young men have ever been through. So you want to impress so much. And what the NFL does is that they try to work you mentally more than the physical part of it. They want to see how you are in these interviews. They want to see if, you know what, if you ask the same question over and over again, will you get the same answer or will you change your answer? So it can have its nerves to it, but you just go up there because I'm here because I'm good at football. All right, I know how to run a 40. I know how to do all these drills. But their biggest thing is how do you talk to these people? Because that's when they fall in love with a player.
So the other part of this, too, that I've always been kind of fascinated with, and I obviously have no idea what this is like, but up to that point in your athletic career, you had been kind of competing for the love of the game. Even if you had NFL on your mind, it was still, you know, amateur athlete versus amateur athlete. But the high-stakes nature of the combine, when you run, when you lift, when you do those things, even as you said, when you interview, all of a sudden now you're doing this for money, and doing better gets you more money. Doing not so good may cost you some money. Did that not change the butterflies in your stomach part of this at all, knowing now you really were out there just competing for the dollars?
Oh, yeah, without a doubt. Well, again, I was so green, ABA, I just wanted to just go play football. I didn't really know the significance of a bad combine workout. You always what the scouts would say before you came into the combine, or some people would read those publications of, well, you know what, Mel Kiper has to be slotted in the second round, so that's obviously where I'm going to go. And sometimes people get caught up in that. But yeah, you're talking about a half a second or a half an inch might cost you $1 million. So, yes, that's in the back of your mind, but you can't let that be your focus while you're up there. You just got to go out there and do you've done your whole life, and that's just compete. And I think a lot of guys get to a point where they're so worried about the 40-yard dash. They're so worried about the three-cone shuttle. They're so worried about these things that sometimes you don't get your best performance because you're sitting there worried, okay, he just jumped a 10-8 in the broad jump. I got to beat that or else he's going to be drafted for me. You can't look at it like that. You got to go out and compete.
What would you say it's going to be like the next couple of days for Isaac Nada, a guy that knows your position? You obviously know Nada. You've watched him closely. It's been a hot debate, and you've weighed in on it about how Georgia has or hasn't used the tight ends, Nada included. I get the sense, based on some of the stuff that I'm seeing online, that the NFL scouts are going to kind of like this young man, and he has a chance to actually be a pretty good draft pick. What's your outlook for Nada as his NFL career kind of gets ready to officially begin?
Well, I saw my man Charles Robinson. He's tweeting out the height and weight. I saw Isaac was at 6'3" and 244, which is a good size for today's NFL because he's not asked to block in line anymore. But he can do it. He did a lot of it at Georgia, and I expect him to be somewhere third, fourth round possibly. He's a guy that can play special teams, a big, fast athlete that I think can develop into a starting tight end. But again, one thing I know about Isaac from being around him and watching him play, this kid loves to compete. And so I look for him to go out and have a good time and a good day up in Indianapolis.
Let me follow up on Nada real quick on just one thing. One of the things we've kind of chatted about with our audience the last couple of days is, you know, even though some Georgia fans would say Nada didn't get used enough at Georgia, he actually ended up having a pretty productive statistical year this past season. When you look at Charlie Werner, who's probably next in line to be kind of the next Isaac Nada at Georgia, how easy is that, or maybe easy is the wrong word, but what do you think the transition is going to be like as Werner kind of goes from being the second tight end on this list to all of a sudden now being the guy called upon to do a lot of the things that Nada did a year ago? What do you expect that transition to be like for Charlie Werner?
Well, it's hard to say because, you know, they rotated so much. Charlie did get playing time even though Isaac was listed as a starter. But one thing that I learned as a young player, I learned this from Larry Brown who played tight end before me. Yeah, everybody wants to be the one until it's time for you to be the one. And that's the one thing about losing Isaac is that Charlie's going to have to play a much bigger role. And is he ready for it? Because it's always easy to say, well, I should be the starter. I want to be the starter. But when you get that opportunity, what are you going to do with it? I expect him to play well. And I think that, you know, yeah, I look at it as I saw the gifts that Isaac Nada has. And I thought you can use it a lot more. And I think a lot of other people are like, well, he's a five-star, so why are we getting the ball? I just saw his ability when he had the ball in his hands. I always thought he could do more.
As far as some of those other juniors that are going to the NFL for Georgia, it seems like the projections are kind of all over the place. Riley Ridley is a wide receiver. McCole Hardman is both a receiver and a kick returner. Even Elijah Holyfield, it seems like some have a really favorable opinion of him and maybe others maybe not quite so much. Have you been able to formulate much of an opinion on how you think that the other juniors, Hardman and Ridley and Holyfield, how much of a home they may be able to find in their rookie seasons in the NFL?
Well, I think McCole Hardman will be the start kick returner for whatever team he's on day one. I think it's just his explosive ability, and then you can work with him as a receiver. That's why I wish he would stay because I think he needs more polishing as a wide receiver. But he's going to be the day one starter as a kick returner for whatever team he's on. When I look at Elijah, I think Elijah's going to help an NFL team and eventually become a starter. Now, you know, me working here at Sports Radio 90% of the game, we're trying to do these mock drafts. And they need a running back. And I'm like, why not draft Elijah? I mean, yeah. But, you know, the myth between, you know, the Falcons drafting Georgia players or whatever. But I think Riley, he's like a, you know, he's an enigma to me because you see he has all the physical tools. Now, do you blame his production on the fact that they rotate a lot of receivers? Or was he not able to take the threshold as the number one receiver? But teams love his measurables. I could look at him as probably a second-round pick. And DeAndre Baker, we already know he's a stud. We already know where he's a senior, but we know that he's going to be a top, maybe 15-type player. And I think he's going to be a starter from day one.
Yeah, along the lines with DeAndre Baker, and you mentioned, you know, being in Atlanta, working in the radio there at 92.9 The Game, there's also been some buzz of, hey, Falcons also need a defensive back. You know, is there a chance that Baker gets in the mix for that? One way or another, whether Baker goes to Atlanta or somewhere else, this will be another year in a row, just like Roquan Smith was drafted very high by the Bears last year, that a guy like Baker is going to get drafted really high this year. Obviously, that helps Georgia's brand immensely, right? When year after year they're putting, you know, big-time guys near the very top of the first round. Those guys are signing big-time signing bonus checks as first-round draft picks. That only helps the brand of Georgia grow, right?
Heck yeah. You watch these Saturday shows just like I do. And what's the majority of these kids say? My next 3 to 4 years. These kids are trying to get to the NFL as fast as possible. And if you see a program pumping out these type of players and also competing for championships, yeah, they want to go, man. And I think that's the greatest thing for Georgia with the hire from Kirby is that he's getting Sunday guys more often. And I'm talking about Sunday guys in the trenches. Because, I mean, as much as the throwing the ball around and everything is so fancy, football games are won in the trenches. And I think that this is a great thing. And I get a little irritated sometimes when they like to put out the page of how much a player is making, because I always believe it's out of a man's pocket. But, yeah, it is an amazing accomplishment. You have back-to-back first-round draft picks.
Hey, let me do one more thing before we let you go here. Now I also want to find out how folks can hear on the radio in Atlanta as well. But as far as the team coming back for 2019, I mean, the big difference in this offseason compared to last offseason is that quarterback competition that we paid so much attention to a year ago is gone. Justin Fields is in Columbus now, and this team belongs to Jake Fromm. How do you think that changes the feeling in the locker room going into spring practice, which begins in a couple of weeks, and then the season that will start at the start of the fall, now knowing that Fromm's not looking over his shoulder, for better or for worse, this is his team. You lose a little depth at the quarterback spot, but you get maximum clarity in terms of who the leader is going to be. How do you think that changes things for the better or just making it different?
Well, the thing about it is, this is just on me. I never thought it was a competition. I always thought Jake Fromm was going to be that guy, and I always thought it was going to be his locker room. I thought Justin Fields was going to help and play more, but I always thought this was Jake Fromm's team. As far as the locker room and everything, you know what's happening now? There's no more angst. There's nothing, a storyline or anything. Justin Fields is gone already. Maybe if he transferred in the summertime, but he's gone. There really isn't that big story other than filling some positions of need or, competition, but there's not that big story. And I think that's going to be bode well for the team.
So for the folks who are in the Atlanta area who just want to check out online, you are on the radio a great bit on 92.9 The Game. Tell us more about that, how we can find you, Randy.
Well, they call me in whenever they feel like calling me in, but I'm always on the weekend. Always on the weekends and everything. And, I just act like I know how to talk ball. That's all.
Yeah, listen.
I'm just a guy they try to call me a media guy, BA, but I'm just a guy that talks ball. That's it.
That's all you got to be, and that's all people want you to be, and that's why so many Georgia fans still love hearing from you, Randy. We appreciate you being here on DawgNation Daily. We'll look forward to hearing a bunch from you on the radio as well, and hopefully we'll get a chance to catch up with you soon as well.
No problem, BA. Anything for you, my man.
Really good stuff there from Randy McMichael, the great former Georgia tight end who's really outspoken, and he says he likes talking ball. He's just a sharp guy, right? And you love the idea of these former players who still stay really plugged in, both to the NFL level. And y'all go look on that Wikipedia page, man, or one of these NFL sites. Randy played in this league for a long time, and you learn a lot about the sport when you have as many days on that gridiron as he had, and he's good enough to keep sharing that. And I love the idea of, for a guy like Randy, who's been in San Diego, been in Miami, could kind of go back and live anywhere. He stays in the state because he's still got great affection for the University of Georgia, and you really like that. And what he says about Fromm there at the end in that discussion, I think is also really interesting. That for him, this was always going to be Jake Fromm's team anyway. But now with Fromm as the sole quarterback, you get that additional clarity for the rest of the folks in that locker room. And I do think that's potentially important, especially when you hear some of the things that the former Georgia guys have kind of said on their way out the door. You wonder, did that full level of clarity exist for this team a year ago? For better or for worse, because obviously Justin Fields is an incredible talent, and not having him, subtracting him from the 2019 roster, does make Georgia worse because the quarterback depth is not what it was before. I won't pretend otherwise on that. But in terms of Fromm not having to look over his shoulder, in terms of everyone knowing where to look, in terms of the true leader, and I think that Jake Fromm gets a chance to be that. Mike Griffith talked about that a little bit yesterday. I think that's a big step forward for what Georgia can do offensively. There were also a couple other things that Randy said there that I thought were worth making sure that we took a minute to point out. I love his phrase, Sunday guys, and he's right. Every one of these commitment ceremonies that we broadcast here on our DawgNation video channels, they're all the same. The guys say, I'm going to spend the next 3 to 4 years of my life at blah, blah, blah. And oftentimes that is the University of Georgia. These guys do know they have a clock that starts the moment they sign. And in 3 years, their plan is to be on their way to the NFL, getting a chance to do what DeAndre Baker's going to do this year, what Roquan Smith did as a junior last year, and they get a chance to do that too. And if you're Georgia, having that pipeline, that cycle of these quote-unquote Sunday guys that Randy McMichael talks about, I do think that's a great brand for the program, and it does lead to the kind of success on the field that Georgia fans want to see. if you are not putting guys into the NFL Combine and into the NFL Draft and into the really high rounds of the NFL Draft, then as a coaching staff, I do think you have to look at yourself in the mirror and say, are we doing enough for our players? Not only are we doing right by our fans and the university that's paying us a lot of money to go out and win football games, but are we doing right by our players? Are we investing in them so that they can go make a bunch of money and one day reinvest in the University of Georgia with some of those NFL riches? Are we doing enough by them by the way we're preparing them for the NFL? And really, over the course of the next couple of years, I mean, expect to see a lot of NFL linemen drafted very high. Andrew Thomas could be the next one of those in 2020. Defensive linemen are going to be a big part of this conversation. It's already been linebackers. It'll be cornerback this year. Another couple of wide receivers, maybe as many as 3 former Georgia wide receivers joining the ranks of the NFL this offseason. Georgia can, slowly and surely start to say that they are checking all those boxes when it comes to NFL success. It'll always be, to a certain extent, thought of as running back university, but not at the expense of any other position group, as they all start to be well represented in the NFL. But then in the immediate short term, that does leave one more, a little bit of a, I guess, challenging issue where, fans can find a way to spin anything towards the negative. If you see McCole Hardman drafted, I want to say Randy said he thought he could be drafted as high as the second round. I mean, a lot of these guys, Riley really has a chance to sneak into a pretty high draft pick. Nauta will have a chance to do that. Depending on what you hear about Elijah Holyfield, maybe him as well. But in particular with the pass catchers, Ridley and Hardman and Nauta, there's always going to be this thing of, were they used enough at the University of Georgia? And the honest truth is, it's hard to say. I mean, the Georgia offense was certainly plenty productive this past year, but those deep throws down the field, those big moments of airing it out, that would still seem to be the missing piece for Georgia in a national championship. And so, those questions are going to linger. But the better overall bottom line is that it would certainly appear that Georgia's going to be very much involved in the NFL draft conversation this spring, and that itself becomes a great commercial for future recruits signing up and joining the program. And that pipeline just regenerating itself every single year will certainly expect to lead to a lot of winning on the field on college football Saturdays. And for Georgia fans, that is definitely good news.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Really always very fun to have Randy McMichael on DawgNation Daily. I really enjoy that, and good stuff from him today. By the way, as we start our SEC Through here, let me remind you about our friends at Pella Window and Door of Georgia, who equips your house with energy-efficient windows and doors. And there's a lot to like about Pella. They're a national company, so you get a lot of strength from that. They also have a locally owned branch right here in Georgia, so you get that individualized service, which is really important when stuff like this is going on. Listen, there's nothing that's going to make your house better, both in terms of the aesthetic appeal and just kind of saving money in your heating and cooling bills, than making sure you've got the best possible windows, the best possible doors. And with Pella Window and Door of Georgia, not only do they offer a great product, but they also offer a terrific price right now and a great offer. You can currently get up to 40% off qualifying installations or 0% APR for 48 months. This offer is valid through March 28th, so you're going to want to take advantage of this pretty quickly to make sure you get in on this deal from Pella Window and Door of Georgia. A couple different ways to get in touch. Online at pellasoutheast.us. That's pellasoutheast.us. Or you can give them a call in the Dunwoody showroom at 404-445-2979. The number, once again, 404-445-2979. Pella Window and Door of Georgia. They are viewed to be the best. All right, we were talking about how Georgia is going to be very active at the Combine, very active in the NFL Draft. Great commercial for the future of the program. A school in the SEC that is decidedly the opposite on that is apparently the University of Tennessee. Andrew Siciliano, who covers the NFL, tweeted this out. I wanted to show this to you on the screen for those of you watching on video. Siciliano writes that there are 7 Power 5 schools that don't have a single player at the NFL Scouting Combine. One of those is Arizona. Another one of those is California. Another one is Oregon State. Listen, you'd expect that from these Pac-12 schools. Illinois not represented, despite the fact they have a former NFL coach and Lovie Smith as head coach. Purdue not represented. Georgia Tech not represented. Great job by Paul Johnson with his recruiting efforts over the last few years. I guess that'd explain why Jeff Collins is now the head coach there. But also on the list is Tennessee. Tennessee does not have a single player at the NFL Scouting Combine. Now, I don't follow the Combine that closely, so this was news to me. I was surprised to hear this. And obviously, I guess it makes a certain bit of sense because I think most of the schools you're going to see on there, Arizona and Georgia Tech and Tennessee, they're all going to have fired coaches recently. Otherwise, if they were putting a lot of guys in the NFL scouting combine, the previous coach probably wouldn't have gotten fired. But even with that, the transition from Butch Jones to Jeremy Pruitt, there's no excuse for not having a single person in the NFL scouting combine. That is a pretty significant and stark indictment of your program. And I think that speaks to just how far of a climb, how long of a journey it may be for Jeremy Pruitt to kind of return Tennessee back to relevance. He's obviously doing a good job in recruiting, and I won't dispute that. But I think when you look at the overall bigger picture of that 85-man roster, there are apparently a lot of holes on that thing, and it's going to take Jeremy Pruitt a while to get that thing turned around. That is not the kind of thing that you broadcast and brag about if you're Tennessee. Hey, we had nobody at the NFL Scouting Combine. That's a little rough. Another SEC story that I want to get to for SEC through, and this is one of those things that I feel weirdly strong about, although it probably doesn't matter all that much. We have been in a trend in the SEC in particular, but across college football for the most part over the last few years, where coaches don't name starting quarterbacks. This is not like a media thing of, hey, you owe it to us to tell who your starting quarterback is. For the most part, they don't name them because they want the competition to be ongoing. They think there's some value in that. And part of this is obviously it keeps guys from transferring from the program. I won't be naive about that. But this is also the thing of, and Kirby Smart is one of the big believers in this, I believe, that when there is the potential of a legitimate competition, that you make all the guys in that competition better by holding it out as long as you can and making them believe they're all in it. So you'll end spring practice, no starting quarterback being named. You'll go through summer practice. Oftentimes before the week 1 of the season, you still haven't named a starting quarterback. And there's obviously some merit to that strategy, I'm guessing. But I'm also a big believer that there is another strategy that can be effective as well. Sometimes I think it's valuable for teams to say, we need to rally around a guy, and therefore we're going to name a starting quarterback. And we're not going to go through the motions of pretending there's a competition. We need to establish a leader. We need to establish a focal point for our team, and therefore we're naming a starting quarterback. Well, Barry Odom, the Missouri coach, did that this week. He named Kelly Bryant, the former Clemson quarterback, the transfer, his starting quarterback. And I think this is actually a pretty smart thing for Barry Odom to do. Now, you may think, well, it's a foregone conclusion that Bryant will be the quarterback, so why not name him? There are plenty of other foregone conclusions that get ignored by coaches in the name of fostering a pretend, phony, fake competition. So Odom doing this still makes him a bit of an outlier. And there are also some other talented quarterbacks in this Missouri roster. Lindsey Scott, the former LSU transfer, he's here. So this is not a quarterback position without talent, but they name Bryant the starter nonetheless, and I think this is good. Bryant's already said he's not transferring in the wake of the NCAA sanctions that Missouri's dealing with, and I think that Odom here is doing something smart by saying, we're not going to pretend there's a competition when there's actually not. We have a quarterback who's head and shoulders better than the rest. Look to him as your leader. Look to him as the nucleus of our team, and I think that more coaches actually should follow in behind what Barry Odom's doing. Couple of other quick points to get to here, and I'll do this kind of fast because I want to do our T-shirt giveaway. Will Muschamp had some really significant words of praise for Zach Pickens, the 5-star signing at defensive line that the Gamecocks just brought in. I'll have to say that this past offseason, I thought that South Carolina was a program kind of on the rise. The on-field results this season seem to belie that, suggesting that they're kind of a middling, floundering program, and that maybe they're going to get lost in the shuffle of a re-energized SEC East. The presence of Pickens could change a lot of that kind of stuff. You've got to have those elite top-end guys performing the way that their recruiting profile suggests they're supposed to. So if Muschamp turns out to be right about Pickens, that could change the fortunes a little bit for the Gamecocks. I saw where Mike Johnson made some headlines, our buddy, the former Alabama All-American and frequent guest here on DawgNation Daily, because he's now the Birmingham Iron. That's the Alliance of American Football team based in Alabama. He's their color analyst on the radio, and he goes on a Alabama radio show yesterday and says he thought the University of Alabama could beat the AAF team by a few touchdowns, I think he said. This is not controversial, right? I mean, Georgia could beat the Atlanta team by multiple touchdowns. The top-end SEC teams are going to beat these AAF teams. It's not like saying the same thing with the Buffalo Bills. I saw where Mikey got some attention for that, but I don't think it's that controversial of a statement. And it's kind of cool to see Mike making headlines. I miss Mike. It's kind of fun to see him out there in the news. One more story to get to, and this is not necessarily SEC related, but it's probably worth mentioning. Wisconsin quarterback Alex Hornibrook, who I believe had been a 3-year starter for the Badgers, had dealt with some injuries, a couple of different injuries this past year, has put his name in the transfer portal. And there was a different quarterback that ended up starting the bowl game. They brought in a pretty good-looking freshman quarterback this season. But, I mean, the seeming incumbent entrenched starter was Hornibrook, and it's kind of funny. It gives you an idea of where these quarterbacks kind of think about the nature of their competitions right now, because he may be the favorite to reemerge there as the quarterback, but it's not a sure thing. And so, therefore, it seems like he's going to put himself in the open market to find a more sure thing than he has in Wisconsin. That we're kind of in a new age when it comes to stuff like this. And for a guy like that who's played a lot of football, I would imagine he's going to have a lot of potential suitors. I have no idea where he'd want to go. I don't know if there's an SEC team this late stage who would consider bringing him in. But this one may be worth watching, as Hornibrook, who's played a lot of football for the Badgers, is now on the open market. We'll make that your SEC through. All right, here on DawgNation Daily, I said yesterday that, in honor of the ongoing conversation that's out there, Georgia and Alabama getting back together, we hope, in December in the SEC championship game, that we're going to do our part to kind of stoke the flames that over the course of this offseason. And, we talked a lot about the road to Atlanta. And for 2019, the road to Atlanta can really mean a couple different things. It can mean getting back for the SEC championship again. It can be getting to the Peach Bowl for the national semifinal, the home field advantage there. It can mean a lot of different things. For us, though, it's just a symbolic gesture of saying that DawgNation is united on this as Georgia refocuses its attention on finally taking down the Alabama Crimson Tide. We think 2019 is a year that can indeed happen. And so we're going to do a fun T-shirt giveaway as a way of making all that go down. Now, I will also say there's some business stuff we have to take care of. I've been challenged with doing a couple different things in 2019. One of those is growing our YouTube subscriber base. So we're going to try to make this fun as we do this. Let me lay this out, and let's see if this is not too convoluted. I have a email address I want to give you. If you're watching a video, we'll put this on the screen. If you're listening, I'll give it to you right now. It's DND, that stands for DawgNation Daily, DNDT-shirts@gmail.com. I'm going to say this a lot, but go ahead and write this down so you can remember it. DNDT-shirts@gmail.com. No dash in between the T and the shirt. Just DNDT-shirts@gmail.com. Do y'all think this is too convoluted? If I say send an email to that email address with a picture showing that you have subscribed to DawgNation's YouTube page, will this work? Is this too convoluted? Can we make this happen? Connor, you think this is good? All right, Connor seems to think this is good. He's young, cool, and hip. So if he thinks this is going to work, Michael thinks it's going to work. So do this. Send the email, dndtshirts@gmail.com. Show a picture of you having subscribed to the DawgNation YouTube page. I'm going to take every person that sends one, write the names down, put them in a hat. I'll draw out a winner, and tomorrow I'll announce our first Road to Atlanta T-shirt giveaway. So that seems simple enough. Let's see how that works. And we'll wrap up the program. All right, as we wrap up today, let me do a couple of quick things. First of all, Diamond Dogs got upset 2 nights ago to Long Island, Brooklyn. They lost like 1-0. They did get back to winning ways last night. In-state rival Kennesaw State, I think 11-1 the final was there. The Diamond Dogs got that win. For the most part, their season's not going to be told by what happens during the week. It's more of a weekend thing and how they perform against SEC competition coming up in a couple of weeks. But they did avenge their first loss of the season with a win against the Owls last night. Not as good news, though, for the men's basketball team. A loser last night to Auburn, although great work by Dog fans this year filling that Stegman Coliseum. A lot's been made of the attendance success for Tom Crean in his first year. Kind of cool to see the Stegman Coliseum full once again, so good stuff there on that. By the way, around here we are Gator haters. We don't like those lousy, stinking Gators. We're proud to say, as part of our Gator Hater Updater, it's been 852 days since Florida's beaten Georgia. We'll keep counting that number, and we'll see you tomorrow right here on DawgNation Daily. And on video. So hopefully the T-shirt giveaway ends up not being too convoluted. DNDT-shirts@gmail.com. We'll draw a winner each and every day, and we'll pick a different way to draw it. Today it's the YouTube subscriber. Just show us a picture that you subscribed on YouTube, a little screen grab there, and hopefully that'll all work the way that it's supposed to. And hopefully we can have some fun here with questions and comments. I'm sure you enjoyed Randy McMichael on today's program. I thought he was great, and let's make that kind of a part of what we do here. It's part of our R.S. Andrews Cool Down. They bring this portion of the show to you each and every day. We kind of get hot and heated up during the program, and when it's all said and done, when the regular edition of DawgNation Daily is over, we're going to kind of cool down a little bit, and the R.S. Andrews Cool Down gives us the perfect opportunity to do that. We're big fans of R.S. Andrews around here at DawgNation because when you call, they show up, and they do only the work that you request for the price they promise. There's no surprise with R.S. Andrews, and this is true not just for the heating and air stuff, which is kind of the first thing that I thought of when R.S. Andrews came to mind. They take good care of your air conditionings. They take good care of your furnace and your heating system. But they also do plumbing and electrical as well. So really, they're the ones we trust to play all the positions around DawgNation. And when they come out to your house, you're going to find out why they are so dependable and so trustworthy. So please check them out online at rsandrews.com. That's rsandrews.com. Our buddy Dari's a big-time dog guy. He's been with us on a lot of these DawgNation invasion trips. He's just a fun guy to kind of, have a beer and talk some football with. And so you'll like Dari, you'll like R.S. Andrews. And when you check them out online at rsandrews.com, you'll find out about some great special offers they have for you. All right. On the comment version of this, and on video, as I'm fond of saying, let me hit a few of these up with you. Let's start on Facebook. Give me a second to dial in here. I guess I didn't have the video comment section up and running before all this began, but we'll dive in and get a few of your comments right now on kind of what you think is going on with the Georgia program. Mike Mazzell says, what's the email again? It's dndtshirts@gmail.com. DND stands for DawgNation Daily. T-shirts is obviously self-explanatory, no dash, just dndtshirts@gmail.com, and hopefully you'll be able to get in on that. James Baldwin says, BA, let's not forget that it was not all that long ago that an 8-win season was a continuum. It was very easy to forget those disappointing seasons when your job was not quite so easy. I go back to 1980 as a student, and my Baldwin family is a tradition foundation family. I love my UGA, but let's not forget where we are. And thank you, Kirby Smart. Yeah, James, I think it's a really fair point to bring up that for all of us, it can be really easy to get spoiled very fast and get used to winning very quickly. But the level of success that Georgia's enjoying right now compared to its historic precedent is pretty rarefied. And so I think that you're very appropriate to bring that up, James, and I'm glad you shared that today as a part of our R.S. Andrews Cool Down. Willie Gray Jr. says, speaking of football attendance, will we break the attendance record at the Notre Dame game? I say yes. Yeah, what do you think the attendance record at Georgia is for an actual game? It's probably just south of 93,000 probably, and I could see that. I could definitely see that. One of the things I do think is pretty good about Georgia, and maybe I'm not as right about this as I think, but for the most part I think I'm accurate, that a lot of stadiums are not full at all on a typical Saturday anymore. And for the most part, the base level of attendance for a Georgia game I still think of as pretty high. We were at South Carolina this year, September, and that's a stadium that I think of as typically being packed to the rafters, and it just wasn't. That was also 150 degrees for that game. It was oppressively, brutally high. But for a stadium that I think of as typically full, and for a marquee rivalry opponent, at least from the perspective of the Gamecocks, not full. I remember at the LSU game, there was an interesting conversation that I overheard where somebody said, is this the most visiting fans you've ever seen in Tiger Stadium any time before? And the person responding said, not only is it the most opposing fans I've seen, this is the most LSU fans that I've seen in a while. So even in Baton Rouge, where you think of that Death Valley home field advantage being one of the most intense in college football, according to some of the LSU people in Baton Rouge this past October, that stadium hasn't always been full for just the regular run-of-the-mill game the last couple of years. But for the most part, unless Georgia's playing like Austin Peay or something like that, when I look around the stadium, I see a stadium that for the most part looks pretty full. There's always that pocket of the 300 level where the upper-level students sit, and there's usually some of the stuff in the end zone, the west end zone, where also it's kind of a student section. Those student sections don't always fill up. But it, to the naked eye, it looks full for the most part. And so I think for the most part, Georgia's done a pretty good job of filling its stadium against just the average run-of-the-mill opponent. But you're right, Notre Dame, I may throw Texas A&M on that too. Those games this year may be extra full, which will be a lot of fun to think. Pete Williams casting his lot with the Facebook crowd in terms of the comment section. Yeah, no matter which section you use, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, we're just glad to have you be a part of the program. Matt Rukavina reminds us, speaking of countdowns, it's been 790 days since Tennessee has been singing Home for the Holidays. Yeah, that's something fun to think about as well. And I guess not having anybody at the NFL Combine starts to make a lot more sense when you realize how long it's been since they've been to a bowl. That's funny stuff from Matt Rukavina for sure. Funny stuff for sure. John William Adams on Facebook says, I'm not as pumped about the Notre Dame at home as it was to be at Notre Dame. They're not our biggest challenge. I like the big event, extra eyeballs on the game. There'll probably be some of that. I mean, I guess I'm kind of the same way that while it's cool to have Notre Dame to come to Athens, I was lucky enough to get to go to South Bend in September of 2017, and that was just one of the all-time experiences. And when you realize just how many Georgia fans were a part of this thing, and, you know, I was hearing stories about flights leaving from LaGuardia Airport in New York, and there being multiple Georgia fans in red and black on those flights going into Chicago, which is the closest big airport to South Bend. You really got the sense of, oh my gosh, this really is, you know, we came up with the name DawgNation Invasion because it sounded good. But when you really got the sense of how much of a DawgNation invasion it was really going to be, that was pretty neat. That was pretty neat. And the return trip for Notre Dame is not quite as special to me yet, but the game itself is going to be huge for Georgia. And as some others have pointed out, there's a little extra motivation on the line just because it's a chance for Georgia to beat a team that was selected over it for the college football playoff a year ago, and that matters to me. Let me go over to YouTube for a minute and see what's going on over there as a part of our R.S. Andrews cool down. Hope you got a chance to check out our Eddies yesterday on Before the Hedges. Oh, it was a lot of fun yesterday. Johnny Lester with kind of a hot take on YouTube. He says LSU and Texas A&M will beat Alabama this year. I'm going to give both those teams a shot. So, Johnny, I think it's cool and very interesting that you're going to say they're both going to do it. But individually, I give LSU a chance, despite the fact that game's on the road. I give Texas A&M a chance as well. Now, I know Alabama on paper is going to be the bull of the woods once again. I do get all of that, but I'm right there with Johnny. I give the Aggies and the Tigers a shot on that one. I think that's pretty good stuff. Connor Riley joins us.
LSU is not beating Alabama.
I'm just saying I'm giving them a chance to happen.
I'm not giving them a chance.
Last year at this time, and I'll remind many of you may have forgotten, I was very down on LSU. Over the course of the offseason, I kind of talked myself into them a little bit more, seemingly every week. Still probably not that high on them before the start of the season, but I had finally decided they may be, somewhat formidable and dangerous. Did not think they would beat Georgia as bad as they did. That was a huge surprise to me, but I kind of talked myself into them over the course of the offseason. This year, I am admittedly very different. I think that LSU on paper, bringing back Burrow as a quarterback, not a stellar guy, but not, he's competent. If you give me my choice of Felipe Franks or Joe Burrow, I'm taking Joe Burrow. If you give me my choice of Joe Burrow or Jarrett Garantano, I'm taking Joe Burrow. I might even take Joe Burrow over Kellen Mond.
I'm not taking Joe Burrow over Kellen Mond. Do you know when the last time LSU beat Alabama was?
2011.
I was a senior in high school getting ready to take the SAT the next morning. Or I took the SAT the last time Alabama lost to LSU.
Yeah, so I get all of that, and I'm not going to go on record saying it's going to happen this year. I'm just saying you've got a returning starting quarterback that's not terrible, which for LSU is kind of a departure from recent norms. The wide receiver core is pretty deep. I think both those freshman running backs are going to play. I mean, we make a big deal about the one that got away for Georgia, and in some cases that ends up being Jaden Hazelwood. I think John Emery Jr. is one that Georgia is going to really regret not closing the deal with his recruitment. I think both he and Ty Davis play. And even with losing Greedy Williams and even with losing Devin White, I think defensively LSU's still got a pretty good bit in place.
They do.
Lawrence of Ahoko, Grant Delpit could be up there for a Bednarik Award. I mean, that's a pretty deep defense.
Not going to happen.
Let me get some other comments. Memphis Dogs say, I'm not saying that LSU is better than Bama, but I could see them winning against Alabama, about a 40% chance. I don't know that I would go as high as 40% chance on that, But I obviously think the chances are much higher than Connor thinks. Kelly Burnett also thinks that Texas A&M is going to be good. I think that too. Maybe I kind of got ahead of myself a little bit when I said Kellen Mond. When you're making a point, it's always good to have 3 bullet points to kind of argue for your point. So maybe I get ahead of myself in saying that that Burrow is better than Mond. But overall, I think that Jimbo Fisher, because of his track record of success, that if you look for candidates for that year 2 bump, where that Kirby got one from 16 to 17, the way that Richt got one from 01 to 02, Jimbo Fisher feels like a real candidate to make that happen, far more so than I think the SEC
A&M
East
does
guys.
have to replace some skill players. Trayvon Walker was a really, really good running back. Probably maybe the best running back in the SEC, probably him and DeAndre Swift. Jay Sternberger was a really good tight end. They also lose quite a bit from their front 7, which and A&M was the best rush defense in the league this year.
Mm-hmm.
But, that A&M brought in a top 5 recruiting class. They brought in a 5-star defensive tackle into Marvin Neal, I believe, who's very, very good.
Got a great defensive coordinator, Mike Elko.
Yeah, Mike Elko. Defense, I think that defense is still going to be very, very good next year.
Here's another really fun hot take. Let me find this one on YouTube. Good comments on YouTube today for our R.S. Andrews cool down. Where'd this go? I gotta find this. I want to give credit to the person who said it. So somebody said that by the Notre Dame game, Zamir White will have 5 touchdowns. Is that 5 touchdowns in 4 games?
It's not unrealistic because the Notre Dame game is their 4th game of the season.
But it's not unrealistic. But you want to talk about happiness? If White has found the end zone in all of Georgia's first 4 games, I would suggest that Georgia fans are going to be very happy. Now, you may score touchdowns and not get 150 yards rushing. I do get that. But in terms of the mood of Dog Nation collectively, 5 TDs through 4 games, or if he's suggesting, the commenter's suggesting it'll be 5 coming into the Notre Dame game, that's a little different story. If Zamir is that productive early on in the season, Dog Nation's going to be in a pretty good mood. Jarvis Hanna's the one that said that. Thanks, Jarvis. Appreciate that.
Before the Notre Dame game, I think we're going to be talking a lot about Zamir White and just asking questions about him because I think they're going to use him in those first couple of games similar to how the New England Patriots use Rob Gronkowski. The big analogy there is, he's like a Ferrari. They're going to keep him in the garage, keep the cover on him, don't take him to go to the grocery store. But that Notre Dame game, they're gonna take the cover off. They're gonna have a fresh coat of wax on there. They're gonna take it on the highway. They're gonna rev the engine up, go 180 miles an hour on 400 or 85, whichever local highway you prefer. And that'll be the game I think Zamir White has his big breakout.
Yeah, that's kind of an interesting point because it's at Vanderbilt, Murray State, Arkansas State. A little bit different for Georgia. They'll be a huge favorite even on the road in the SEC against Vanderbilt. Murray State and Arkansas State should not be competitive. This will be one of the first seasons in a while that if Georgia really wanted to save him as a surprise or save anybody as a surprise, you, for the most part, should be able to get away with that. We've seen, Kirby just does not do much more than he has to some games. And so if they want to be, somewhat lackluster against Vanderbilt just to save some stuff, and it'll be a frustrating conversation. I can't stand those early September conversations where it's, hey, what's Georgia saving and what's it going to spring on opponents when the games really matter. Sometimes that can be wishful thinking. Sometimes maybe it is a little bit true. But the schedule certainly sets up because I don't believe that Zamir will play in G-Day. I don't think that's going to happen.
It'd be foolish to play him on G-Day, I think.
And, not showing very much of him at all against Vandy, Murray State, and Arkansas State does make some sense. So if he is playing and scoring touchdowns, that speaks to even more of how healthy Georgia believes that he is and, how much it wants to establish him, early in the year, which would be kind of a cool thing. But he could have a really big year for Georgia and actually not do anything those first 3 weeks.
Having Zamir White is like having a winning poker hand. You don't have to show it before unless you absolutely have to.
Jarvis Hanna said he also ran into Zeus and Swift at Kroger recently, too. That'd be kind of a funny thing to see walking down the aisle there. Brian McPhail also says, let's run up the score this year. I mean,
Georgia won every game by 2 touchdowns.
Yeah,
every game that it won last year, it won by 2 touchdowns.
But I understand where the comment's coming from in that it doesn't always seem like Georgia chases the style points. Now, as you said, when you look at the overall SEC results, the games that it's winning, it's typically winning easy. But there's something to be said for really going out there and flexing. And I understand why the Georgia fan may feel like he hasn't seen his team do that as much as you might like. It would be funny to see that. It'd be fun to see that.
Joel Moody with a bold prediction. I don't know if I agree with it, but I like it. Dwan Mathis will throw a touchdown before Zeus scores a touchdown.
Okay, that's interesting. And what you're saying there is, I mean, how many of those first 3 games do you think Georgia's looking to play 3 quarterbacks?
1, Murray State.
So if you're saying that Dwan Mathis is going to throw a touchdown, I'm going to assume that you've got Dwan Mathis as your number 2 quarterback. And that would be a big story. If Mathis beats out Bennett for the number 2 quarterback, to me, that's a fairly sizable story.
So they're probably going to try and preserve Mathis's redshirt next year.
Yeah. And
I think the Murray State game might be a game where they say, hey, we're gonna sort of get you involved, make it sort of a, show us what you've done so far, because they're, when Georgia's running the score on the, Kentuckys and South Carolinas later in the season and Stetson Bennett goes in for those games, you're not going to play Mathis in one of those at risk of burning a red
So
shirt.
let's work through that for a minute, because I agree with you, all things being equal, they'd probably like to hold on to a Mathis redshirt year. But that to me is, if it's close between Bennett and Mathis, you play him for 3 games, you save that 4th game if you really, really need him, and then you don't play him beyond that. But if early on, if Mathis just like cleanly and clearly at practice beats out Stetson Bennett, I don't think they're going to worry a bit about a red shirt for Dwan Mathis at that point in time, because they're going to bring in a bunch of quarterbacks for the next couple of years.
Certainly, yeah.
I mean, you can disagree, and anybody's free to disagree. But if Dwan Mathis cleanly, flat-footed beats out Stetson Bennett, they're not going to worry about Dwan Mathis.
And there's certainly a chance that happens.
So if you're going to say Mathis throws a touchdown early in the season, to me, he's not redshirting, and he's playing as much as a backup quarterback that Georgia would play, which, given Georgia's expected leads, you're talking about 7 or 8 games at that point in time. I think it's pretty interesting. By the way, who was it on YouTube? Crystal Chrissy says that I was wanting you and Jeff to sing on the show yesterday. Is this one of those things where I'm going to be Lady Gaga and I'm going to like nestle my my cheek on Jeff's shoulder as we do our piano duet? I will say, at the risk of losing my man card, that song's pretty catchy.
What, Shallow?
That song's
No, Shallow's not pretty catchy. Shallow is an incredible song.
That song's pretty catchy. When you hear that thing and that chorus, that hook kicks in, I gotta say, I'm not unentertained by that song.
Bradley Cooper also should have won Best Actor, but that's neither here nor there.
Yeah, I don't have an opinion on that one way or another. Enrique Murillo says, "BA, listen to the Star Wars version." I don't know what that is, but I now desperately want to know what that is. By the way, on my own personal Twitter feed this morning, I retweeted a picture. You guys got to go check this out, at DawgNation Daily. How about Billy D. Williams from Lando Calrissian fame and Sylvester Stallone from Rocky Balboa fame in the same gym in L.A. this week, posing for the picture? That's a pretty fun way to start your day, right there.
I thought Donald Glover was Lando Calrissian.
Are you serious? Oh, you mean like the new one?
I'm joking.
Thank you. I saw the Solo movie. I didn't think it was bad. But you can't encroach on.
They haven't made a good Star Wars movie since 1980. So whenever Empire Strikes Back came out.
I mean, listen, I'm not gonna get the Star Wars people started up on here, but certainly the 80s ones hold up better.
They're entertaining movies. They're fine, but as far as like an actual good movie, like I would say Empire was the last.
Now, in all seriousness, I really did like Episode 7, and I think that Rogue One, a different kind of movie, is really, really, really good.
I enjoyed like the concept of Rogue One, like the sacrifice of war, and the true like cost of everything. I
thought it was pretty cool. The other thing about Billy D. Williams, the picture that I tweeted out, he's got like this like sweatsuit on with his initials BDW on it. That is fantastic. Robert Barnes, going back to the subject on our R.S. Andrews cool down of redshirting Dwan Mathis, saying, "I don't think we want to redshirt Mathis because we want to bring in a top-rated quarterback in 2020. It's good for the program to have a year in between your quarterbacks." That's probably true, and I'll admit, I really don't know what Georgia's quarterback plan is. And I don't mean to be negative, but, to listen to Kirby Smart, they didn't have a plan last year, and I'm not quite so sure they still have a plan this year because as much as I like Robbie Ashford, if you take his commitment in March, and I'm going to treat it as good news if Georgia gets Robbie Ashford's commitment because I think he's a really good quarterback, but there is the threat of him playing baseball. He is not the same kind of prospect that DJ Uiagalelei is. Maybe Georgia can't get Uiagalelei, and maybe Georgia's just going to wait until 2021 to try to swoop in and get that elite 5-star name and just start another freshman quarterback because that's what everybody's going to be doing by the time 2021 gets here because no one's going to sign anywhere unless they're guaranteed on paper of being the starting quarterback. Maybe that's where all this is going, but as it stands right now, I am not incredibly clear about what Georgia's quarterback plan is going to be.
I'm willing to bet. And Jeff and I, we were talking about quarterback situations after the show yesterday after you had left. If Jake Fromm does leave after the 2020 season, I would be willing to say with some pretty good certainty that Georgia's starting quarterback for that 2020 opener against Virginia is at another college program right now. And
what if it's Alex Hornibrook or the 2021 version of Alex Hornibrook, who was 23-6 as a starter at Wisconsin, had a decent chance of getting benched, ready to stay. I still believe, I think that Alabama with Blake Sims, Alabama with Jake Coker is an example of this, that you can win a national championship with an okay quarterback. This is not the NFL where you got to be, Tom Brady to win a Super Bowl.
Tom Brady wasn't good in the Super Bowl, I'd add.
Well, either way. If you've got elite players dominating the other 21 positions, you can be okay at quarterback. So if in 2021 Georgia is forced to go transfer portal for some version of whatever Alex Hornibrook looks like 2 years from now, can you still win a national championship with
Absolutely.
that? I'd say you probably can.
Yeah. And, that's not to say that, a talented guy, comes available and decides to transfer. I don't think this is going to happen, but, Davis Mills, quarterback at Stanford, played at Greater Atlanta Christian in the metro area. There's a chance he doesn't win out the starting job there and might decide to transfer back, and he'd be certainly an enticing opinion given that he was a 5-star quarterback.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, and it kind of leads me to something else I guess I've been thinking about. The other thing that's going to become interesting to see in a couple of years. Now, you can't tamper with guys who are on scholarship, but you're not supposed to be able to do that in the NBA either, and everybody does it. Could a Georgia on the open market for a quarterback coerce somebody a little higher up the food chain to want to leave? In other words, I'm not about to lose my starting job. I like it where I am, but now I can be the quarterback at Georgia, so therefore I'm going to leave. We haven't seen that yet.
You would be saying, actually, I think we did see that somewhat last offseason. Hawaii's starting quarterback left to go try and become the starter at Oklahoma State and actually got beat out.
Okay.
But theoretically, let's say you're the starting quarterback at Cal.
Yeah.
And you want to go play in the SEC and play for a really good team.
You're not mad. You're not disgruntled. You're not about to get benched. It's just a better opportunity. You mentioned
a Lawrence Cager, but for a quarterback.
Exactly. That could become a really interesting part of this. And you want to talk about shutting this transfer portal down? That's when all heck's going to break loose, and the middle tier teams are going to get really mad because this is the way it always goes. All these rules get put in place, and eventually the bigger power programs exploit them, and they get mad about that, and they start trying to change it. Once Alabama and Georgia and Ohio State and these usual suspects start using this transfer portal to steal the other team's good players, people are going to get really, really mad about that.
Chad Williams jokingly asked, "Trevor Lawrence coming home?"
Listen. I wouldn't kick him out. I would not kick him out. That's exactly right. Something Amos Williams also brought up on our Facebook comment section was, the idea of Fromm getting hurt, and there's no sugarcoating this. Georgia does not have an insurance policy against Fromm injury. I think for really the next 2 years, assuming that Fromm stays for his senior season. If Fromm were to sustain a significant injury, Georgia does not have a contingency for that the way it would have if Justin Fields were still on the roster and the way that Alabama has had the last couple of years. Georgia just does not have that, so you can't sugarcoat that. That is what it is. Joel Moody also says that Kirby knows how important the portal is going to be in both directions, and I think if anybody's going to exploit it to his benefit, Kirby Smart's proven he's the kind of guy that will do that, for sure. For sure. Let me go over to YouTube and get a couple more. C. Hill, going back to the idea of style points for Georgia, says one of his biggest beefs with Jim Chaney was the fact that he wouldn't run the score up. And sometimes I don't know if it was a wouldn't or couldn't or what. I mean, and to go back to something one of our other commenters said, let's not get too spoiled too quickly. Beating everybody by 14 points is actually a pretty significant accomplishment. You know, take the Missouri game, for instance. We were on the air for the post-game show that day, and for the most part, we took mad comments for the entirety of the show. Missouri actually ended up being pretty good, and Georgia was never any real doubt of losing that game. That's an example of a dominant Georgia performance, even though for a lot of fans it's not quite dominant enough. But there was this weird thing with Georgia's offense a year ago where even in the first half of the season, statistically, Georgia was in the top 5 of almost all the analytics categories, the offensive efficiency, things like that. Georgia was in the top 5, but to me and many others, it never quite felt that way. It didn't often look that way. It was one of those things where, you know, statistically, you'd go back and look at it and say, wow, Georgia's just cleaning people's clocks. But the games themselves didn't always feel that way. So I am a little sympathetic of the fans on this, that, you know, it didn't always feel the way that some fans wanted to feel.
Yeah, I think part of that is DeAndre Swift wasn't healthy at the beginning of the season, and I think you saw in the second half of the season the Georgia offense was much better at moving the football when he was healthy and able to be one of the best running backs in the country. And the other thing, you know, the running it up in style points, you know, Georgia should have won that game against Kentucky by 40, but they were settling for field goals, struggled in the red zone that game, struggled in short distance. And the same could be said for the Florida game as well. They left some points on the board in terms of the red zone struggles there. And I think, you know, that's one of the biggest things Coley's going to have to prove this year is creativity, I think, in the red zone. Because, you know, you can, against, you know, while Florida and Kentucky's the world, they may not have the athletes that Georgia has in the open field. When it gets closer to the end zone, it's just tougher to score. And so I think actually that's a place where you're going to want to see more creativity, and I think that is an area under Jim Chaney where Georgia's offense was lacking. All
right, a few comments on YouTube. First of all, Mike D says, let's talk about the 80s and early 90s since we're bringing up the past. I can see B.A. rocking a mullet and some whitewashed jeans. I probably have had some stonewashed jeans in my past, but as far as like the hair thing goes, my thing was never like a mullet or anything like that. But if you want to go back to like early 90s, mid 90s, back when I was like high school, college, what I had was like the gigantic sort of like news anchor, almost like televangelist style hair, like really, really big bangs, a lot of stuff going on the side. I looked like, what's an example of what I would have looked like? I don't really know, but just this huge helmet of hair. I mean, I had like gigantic hair. If you think about like a, you know, like a Craig Kilborn from like a, you know, heyday of ESPN Sports Center or something like that, I just had a really just huge head of hair. I mean, I don't have as much hair as I had back then. I could not recreate what I had back then, but even on the sides, like the big swooping bang stuff, I had very big hair. So maybe one of these days I'll show a picture of that, but it was a lot of hair. K9 Blues also says on YouTube that he thinks if Fromm stays for 2020 that Georgia will have a contingency plan in lieu of a Fromm injury by then, and I wish I was that optimistic about that. Obviously, Georgia's really good at creating contingency plans. I just am really doubtful right now that you can talk a quarterback to coming to a school and being a backup quarterback. I mean, Alabama, you know, almost did that with Gardner Minshew last year, but he went to Washington State, and darn near led the NCAA in passing. Maybe he actually did. You know, you just don't really see a lot of guys who are willing to be backup quarterbacks anymore. No one's transferring as a way of competing for a job. Even this, you know, kid from Wisconsin seems to only be willing to go somewhere if he is just on paper contracted, guaranteed to be the starting quarterback. I mean, maybe I'm being too pessimistic, but if you want to look ahead to 2020, I don't know that you can convince somebody to come to Georgia just to be a backup quarterback.
Can I give you a counterpoint?
Uh-huh.
Alabama was able to do it with Mac Jones. Clemson was able to do it with Chase Bryce.
Well, Chase Bryce didn't know about Trevor Lawrence, though.
Yes, he did. They're the same.
I don't think so.
They were recruiting him around the same time.
But to me, maybe I might.
Trevor Lawrence committed to Clemson before Chase Bryce signed with Clemson.
But it's easy if you're Chase Bryce to think you're better than Trevor Lawrence because everybody thinks they're better than everybody else.
It's easy to think that, but also Trevor Lawrence is a true definition of a generational.
But you'll agree that all these players think they're better than everybody else.
I mean, sure, but I'd also like to think Bryce spoke with the Clemson staff about Lawrence and sort of their plan and their future with him.
I mean, to me, your better argument is Mac Jones, and I would love for Georgia to find its Mac Jones. Mac Jones was a former Kentucky commit from the Bowl School in Jacksonville, signed the same class that Tua Tagovailoa signed with. Tua was always thought to be the better prospect. I don't know if Jones was also delusional and thought he was going to beat out Tua or not, but you haven't heard a whisper of him going anywhere. Seems like he played pretty well for Alabama in its spring game a year ago. I don't really know if he played much on the field this season or not. I honestly just don't know. I don't know if that's just Alabama just being really good at convincing somebody to do something, or if Jones is sort of the last of an era. But I'd love for Georgia to find its Mac Jones.
Mac Jones was on Alabama's most important play of the season when they faked a field goal on 4th and 6 and ran into Clemson's starting defensive line.
That is true.
The kicker is the lead blocker.
You got to give him credit for that. Elite Baller also brought up a good point too on a different subject, which was James Cook. That in terms of early involvement in the season, that Cook might be more important than Zamir White. And I kind of understand where Baller's coming from on this because I want to see what James Cook is bringing to the table. The fact that Georgia seemingly got so far down the road in recruitment with Mark Anthony Richards really speaks to me about what may or may not be going on with James Cook. And I'm not going to tell you I would have turned down Mark Anthony Richards had he wanted to come to Georgia, but as we talked about with Jeff Sintel and our buddy Ben Wolk, who covers Auburn recruiting, as we've talked about with these guys, the description they gave to Mark Anthony Richards, the 4-star top 100 athlete from this past signing class, that's what I want to see James Cook doing. You know, we saw Cook a little bit at the end of the season, with long stretches in 2018, not seeing James really at all. I'm a big believer in Brian Herring. I think that Herring can have a good year. I obviously love, Zamir White, even with the injuries. I still think he's an elite prospect. DeAndre Swift, I talked about him as a Heisman guy off the top of the program. But, man, I really hope that they give James Cook a chance to show what he can do, either catching the football, running the ball, being that kind of athletic freak, that kind of, gadget-type player. I hope to see Cook involved early in the season because my assumption is if he's not involved early in the season, he may not be involved.
Here's my thing with James Cook. So, I get and I understand why people want to see him with the ball, his skill set and whatnot. But he does a lot of things similar to what DeAndre Swift does, and I don't think he's as good, and he's certainly not as big as DeAndre Swift is. So if you're sort of using him that way, that means you're taking carries away from DeAndre Swift, who's just a better overall player than Cook is. And when you start trying to force him touches, that means you're theoretically taking touches away from guys like Brian Herring, Zamir White, and even as a wide receiver, because there's been a lot of talk about that as well, that means, you're maybe not throwing the ball to Demetrius Robertson as much or Dominic Blaylock as much. So with all that in mind, there are only so many touches that can go around. And I think if Cook's going to want to see the field, he's going to have to find a way to sort of show his value without maybe necessarily having the ball in his hands as much.
Yeah, I think the one comparison that people have always wanted to make that's not a good comparison for me is that James Cook's the next Sony Michel. Michel was a true tailback, could run between the tackles. He showed that for Georgia, especially in, say, 2015 when Nick Chubb was hurt. So I think that Connor's right. That's not really the comp for James Cook right now, but that doesn't mean there can't be a role. And if you're dynamic enough as an athlete, you maximize your opportunities even with limited touches. And so I hope that's the case. As far as the true running backs go for Georgia, even a less heralded recruit and kind of a less thought of name sometimes amongst Georgia fans, I think that Brian Herring may be the better overall likelihood of making a big stride even over Cook next year. But that doesn't mean that I don't want to see something for something for Cook on the field. Now, you're never going to get all your playmakers involved as much as you want to, but let's not forget how dynamic Cook could occasionally look, especially on that all-star circuit as he was coming out of high school. Colby Curry says Sony didn't want to run better between the tackles his first year and try to outrun everybody. He had to learn just as Cook will. You may be right about that, but I saw Sony play in high school too at American Heritage, and he was a pretty classic tailback then as well. And I didn't see as much of Cook. I saw full games of Sony, didn't see as much of Cook from his high school time. Maybe he was much the same way, but when I think of when I think of the image I have in my mind of Cook as a high school player and what I remember from having seen Sony, I actually did a couple of his games on TV. I mean, Sony was a pretty classic tailback even by then.
And Sony also didn't have a significant impact as a freshman.
Yeah,
and
it's a deep team.
It was a deep team. He was behind Nick Chubb.
Yeah.
His freshman season was his best season.
Mm-hmm.
He was behind Todd Gurley to start the year. So, and Sony got, these guys are allowed to get better.
Yeah.
Sony, while he rushed for over 1,000 yards as a sophomore, he was a world's better player as a senior than he was as a sophomore when he sort of took over that starting role after Nick Chubb unfortunately got injured.
But he showed me a lot in 2015 though, because he showed me he was tough. He showed me that he was more than just the speedy combination and that sort of thunder and lightning Chubb Michelle duo. He showed me he was a lot more than that. I think he actually put in motion his NFL future by the way that he played in 2015. As good as he was as a senior, he planted the seed for an NFL future by being the classic sort of bell cow tailback in 2015.
G. Grace brings up a really good point. Maybe not the forget Cook point, but I'm telling you how to beat Alabama. Give DeAndre Swift the football. I think we're worrying a little bit too much about the ancillary guys, and I think we need to focus on the fact that DeAndre Swift might be the best running back in the country this season. And assuming he's able to stay healthy, which is always risky, he's a guy who could have 1,400 rushing yards if he wanted to, 400 plus receiving yards, and just be that true every down threat running back that can catch the ball out of the backfield or burst off a long run on 1st and 10.
It's hard for me to even think about the SEC championship game because of
how it ended.
But there are a couple moments in that game where DeAndre Swift was breaking people's ankles.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, so Grace, who is an Alabama guy, certainly knows a lot about Alabama. I mean, Swift played about as well against Alabama as virtually anybody can, which gives you an idea of the kind of overall play.
His yardage numbers weren't overly impressive that game. I think he had 75 total rushing yards, but he clearly showed he belonged on that field. Was maybe Georgia's best overall player in that game, other than DeAndre Walker.
Good way to finish up the conversation today. We appreciate y'all being a part of our R.S. Andrews Cool Down. We do it at the end of every edition of DawgNation Daily. Huge thanks to R.S. Andrews for making it all possible. Check them out online at rsandrews.com. Heating, air, plumbing, electrical. They are really great. They come out to your house. They do just what you need for them to do. No surprises with the price, and they're experts at what they do. They really know how to make your furnace run, keep it going throughout the rest of the winter, get your air conditioning ready for the warm weather season that's coming up, and that's going to be here before you know it. And also plumbing issues, electrical issues. Don't mess around with that stuff yourself. You'll end up drowning or electrocuting yourself or whatever. Trust the folks at R.S. Andrews to do that online at rsandrews.com. All right, busy show for us tomorrow to close out the week. We'll see you at 10 a.m. for that. I'll be back on video today for DN90. We'll do some of that too. Bunch of stuff on the website. Connor's got it. Jeff, Mike, Chip, they're all busy on the website. A lot of content out there right now. So check that out at DawgNation.com. I'll see you tomorrow morning at 10 for DawgNation Daily once again.